Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and I'm here tonight to bring you the very latest on Hurricane Helene as it moves across the Gulf of Mexico and is angling for a North Florida landfall tomorrow night. I'm going to let the audience filter in for a couple minutes here, and then I will get going and detail all the information that you need to know about the wind, surge, and rainfall impacts across the state and beyond into the southeastern United States over the next few days. So sit tight for just a couple minutes, and I will be back in about 2 minutes. All right. Well, good evening again, everyone. I'm Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and this is Hurricane Helene, a storm which is very large, very powerful, intensifying tonight, and I think by tomorrow night is going to stand toe to toe with some of the biggest hurricane hits in Florida history, unfortunately. So I'm going to dig into all the details on the wind, surge, and rain impacts across the state and beyond. So let's get started tonight by talking about the key messages that the National Hurricane Center forecasters want to convey. And I'm just going to summarize them real quick. Catastrophic hurricane force winds, catastrophic and deadly storm surge, catastrophic and life threatening flash flooding across Florida and the southeastern United States. Check, 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 catastrophic, catastrophic, catastrophic for all three of those major hurricane hazards. Uh, that's something that they want you to be aware of, is that all three of those hazards are at a very high level as we're looking at the impacts of Helene on Florida and the southeast. This is the Hurricane Center forecast cone with the latest advisory information as of 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Helene is centered in the south central Gulf of Mexico. It's moving north at about 12 miles per hour, maximum sustained winds up to 85 miles per hour, which is a Category 1 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale. But as I'm going to emphasize many times tonight and did so last night as well, we don't want to judge this storm by its category because it's much more than what its highest sustained winds are going to be, and those sustained winds are going to be coming up. Hurricane Center forecast track has not changed very much at all since yesterday. Still accelerates this storm northeast tomorrow across the eastern Gulf into a North Florida eastern panhandle landfall tomorrow night. If we take a little bit closer look at the zoomable version of that cone, you can see here's the initial position as of 8 o'clock. You can see the satellite overlay shows that Helene is following that path. It intensifies to a Category 2 hurricane during the overnight hours and then rapidly intensifies as it moves north-northeast tomorrow. This is the forecast point for about 2 o'clock tomorrow. It's up to a Category 4 hurricane. Maximum sustained winds estimated to be around 130 miles per hour, and then accelerates north to landfall somewhere in Appalachia Bay here. This Hurricane Center forecast track has not changed much since yesterday. It's nudged a little bit to the west. I would not be surprised if it nudged a little bit back to the east at some point going forward over the next 12 hours. But that said, we're going to see a landfall very likely of a major hurricane, certainly an extraordinarily impactful hurricane, somewhere in Appalachia Bay tomorrow night. This is the National Hurricane Center intensity forecasts over the last day and a half. The peak intensity forecast is now up to Category 4. That's above 130 miles per hour. So that is a slight increase since yesterday when it was peaking out as a Category 3, but it's not all that big of a difference. Realistically, again, the range of landfall outcomes is probably in the Category 3, Category 4 range if you're looking at it by category, which again really doesn't capture how large and powerful the storm is going to be. How do we know how strong Helene is right now? Well, there's 2 Hurricane Hunter aircraft flying around in it. So here's Florida. One took off from Mississippi, the other took off from Lakeland. They've converged on the storm, and they're taking wind and pressure observations as they fly around in it tonight. And one thing that we notice here is that each of these dots where they've located the center of the storm, these dots are basically advancing due north at this point, or even slightly, very slightly east of due north. So we do think Helene has probably gone as far west as it's going to go. Also, as these aircraft have been flying around for the last 3 or 4 hours, we have seen some slight pressure falls, minimum pressure of 975 millibars as of about 7 o'clock, and now into the 9 o'clock hour, pressure's down a couple more millibars to 973. Other thing to note here is that these kind of orange and gold wind barbs, those are your highest winds at flight level as the aircraft is flying around. So you can see that this area that I've outlined of the strongest winds out here, it's removed from the center by a fairly long ways. It has what we call a pretty large radius of maximum winds at this point. So that means the hurricane has a lot of room to tighten up tomorrow. And when that core of the strongest winds gets tighter, that's when the strongest winds go up. So we'll see if that happens as it moves north across the Gulf of Mexico tomorrow. But it already has a very broad, very strong wind field. All these purples and reds, those are all areas of winds at flight level. The reds are winds at flight level exceeding 50 knots, or about 58 miles per hour. So big, broad area of strong tropical storm force winds. So a couple things to talk about in terms of the steering and intensity, track and intensity forecast. I want to get through this quickly because I want to talk mostly tonight about the impacts and what we expect. But basically what we're going to see Helene do tomorrow is accelerate northeast across the Gulf of Mexico and approach the eastern panhandle or Florida Big Bend region. The things that are steering it, we can see on water vapor imagery, there's this upper level, what we call a cutoff low. You can see it swirling around there on the water vapor imagery. A little harder to see, but there's a big ridge of high pressure out here east of the Carolinas. And just as yesterday, these things are coming in pretty much as they were forecast to be yesterday. And you can see that that kind of sets up this channel for Helene to go through, and it's going to follow that channel into landfall in the Big Bend. The other thing that these upper level features are going to do is this upper level low. You can see all these high clouds streaming away, far out away from the storm. These very strong winds that's spreading out that air as it's rising through the atmosphere. And as Helene moves into the east central Gulf tomorrow up into this region, it's going to really be experiencing the best outflow provided by these strong upper level winds. And good outflow, unfortunately, means intensification. So that's why the NHC is calling for it to jump from a Category 1 hurricane now to a Category 4 hurricane by tomorrow afternoon. It's a very aggressive forecast from the NHC, but there's a good reason for it. Also going along with those very favorable atmospheric conditions that it'll have tomorrow afternoon, just extreme ocean heat content. This is the difference between the amount of total heat content in the upper levels of the ocean and what we would normally expect, and all these kind of reds and purples, it's double or more the normal amount of heat content. So as Helene comes up here and follows a path kind of like this, it's going to ride right along that this loop current area of that extreme oceanic heat content. So it's unfortunately going to provide a lot of raw fuel for the storm to turn into wind and rain and surge. I don't want to focus too much on the models tonight because we're within almost 24 hours of a landfall. It's time to mostly turn to observations. We don't need to fixate on an individual model. We do want to look at what the models are doing in aggregate in general, those trustworthy models that have a good track record of performance. So this is where the storm is now as of around 8 o'clock. As we go forward in these 6-hour time steps, we can see that there's very good consensus over the last day and a half, 2 days worth of model runs on this track towards Appalachia Bay. And once again, you can see, I pointed this out last night, you can see these ellipses, they're getting smaller and tighter with time. Each model run has less uncertainty, less variability in where the storm is going to come in and make landfall. They're all focused very much on the Appalachia Bay region, and I do think that that's where we're actually going to be seeing landfall occurring tomorrow night. So anyway, let's pivot. Let's talk about impacts, because that is what we care about as human beings and as a society, and what we need to prepare for and react to. Last night I talked about wind first. Tonight I'm going to talk about surge first, because it is the number one life-threatening situation here associated with Helene's expected landfall. This range here between Carabel and the mouth of the Suwannee River, NHC is going with an extremely aggressive 15 to 20 feet of potential storm surge. And that's also factoring in the likelihood that landfall tomorrow night, likely sometime between 9 p.m. and midnight, it's going to be happening very close to high tide here in Appalachia Bay. So that's bad luck for us as well. That powerful wall of water that's being driven north by those south to north winds on the east side of the storm, pushing the water into the shallow continental shelf of Appalachia Bay. Water has nowhere to go but inland, and it's going to pile up to a height at a peak of 15 feet up to 20 feet in central and eastern Appalachia Bay. So that's something, there is just no record of surge of that height, at least in the past 100 plus years in Appalachia Bay. It's not something that we've seen before. It's not something that there's a living memory of. And if you're looking at these numbers and you're in these areas tonight, you need to be realizing that this isn't something to ride out. You need to run from water because water is the real killer in hurricanes. So this is a model that shows if the NHC forecast track as of 5 p.m. was followed precisely, and we have this landfall point somewhere here in Franklin County, all of Appalachia Bay is seeing these surge heights exceeding 10 feet, and this saturates at 10 feet. So that 15 to 20 foot range here in central and eastern Appalachia Bay, it's just not even shown on this model map because it's such an absurdly high height. Even further south, as you go south down into the Nature Coast and into the Tampa Bay region, significant surge there as well, on the order of 5 to 8 feet, 6 to 10 feet up here around Cedar Key on that NHC forecast track as it currently exists. Now, I do want to also show an alternate scenario here. This would be if the NHC forecast track shifts a little bit to the east, not dramatically to the east, but now we're talking about a landfall somewhere between St. Mark's and Perry. And in this circumstance, that would be good news for the western half of Appalachia Bay, but you would still be getting those extreme surge values of 15 to 20 feet here in eastern Appalachia Bay, 10 feet or more on the northern Nature Coast, and then you'd also be seeing even higher numbers, maybe 6 to 10 feet down here into the Tampa Bay region locally as well. So that's something to keep in mind. While the exact numbers are not locked in, there is definitely a massive, dangerous, life-threatening storm surge coming to Appalachia Bay, the Nature Coast, and even down to Tampa Bay. Something to take very, very seriously, no matter how this track shifts in the next 24 hours. And because of that, NHC has a storm surge warning in effect all the way from uh, Apalachicola down to the Everglades. That hasn't changed since yesterday. We're warning kind of the same swath of all of the Florida Gulf Coast. Well, I want to take a look at a little more detail tonight, just to motivate you to take action if you're listening to me from coastal Gulf or Franklin or Wakulla, Taylor, Dixie, or Levy counties. These are surge maps produced by the National Hurricane Center. This is potential storm surge flooding values that would be exceeded about 10% of the time. So this is kind of your somewhat of a theoretical peak, but somewhere is going to in this range is going to see these type of values. It's a kind of what you would call a realistic worst case scenario, something you need to prepare for. And all these areas that are in red here, those are areas that are going to be likely, or at least possibly, greater than submerged under over 9 feet of water at the peak of this storm. So all along from west central Appalachia Bay all the way down to Cedar Key and south, we're looking at those inundation values potentially pushing 10 feet or more. And then this is just taking a look further south along the Nature Coast into Tampa Bay. Here too, quite significant surge. You're seeing these regions along the coast here where there's some areas that are going to be inundated to 3 to 6 feet on what's ostensibly dry ground. So a very serious threat there as well. Locally, of course, consult your local emergency management. Know your flood region, your evacuation region, if you live in these areas, and if you've received an evacuation order, it's not too late to go. There's nothing more important than getting out of these areas that are going to flood. Just in even more detail here along the Appalachia Bay coast, you can really zoom in and see these areas that are looking for possible storm surge values that we're going to put you 6, 9, even more feet of dry land being underground. You can see these areas. It's a very extensive chunk of Franklin County, a very extensive chunk of Wakulla County, Dixie, Taylor. I mean, there's large sections of these counties that are going underwater at the peak of this storm, and that's especially true in these regions outlined in red, which are going to be the furthest underwater. So this is not a survivable situation. 15 to 20 feet of storm surge, 15, 20 feet, that's above the second story of a 2-story building. You've just got to leave. You've just got to get out of these low-lying areas. You don't have to drive to Mississippi or Alabama or Louisiana to get away from the surge. You just need to go inland enough to be out of the flood region. Go to a place where the height of the land is 30 feet instead of 6, and that'll save your life. So if you're listening to me from one of these areas and you think I don't want to drive to Tennessee, you don't have to drive to Tennessee. Find a shelter and just go inland because it's the right thing to do, and it could very well save your life. I do want to point out one other thing about the surge, and this is, as we're forecasting there to be a landfall somewhere in Appalachia Bay, that variability of where the storm comes in, it really does matter for western Appalachia Bay, because the area to the west of where landfall occurs are predominantly going to be seeing winds blowing offshore, pushing water away from land. So you may get some surge at some points during the storm. Certainly can't rule that out with all the water sloshing around in Appalachia Bay tomorrow night. But the places that see offshore winds are going to be much better off than the places that are seeing these very powerful onshore winds and seeing this long fetch pushing that water onshore. So this is 11 o'clock tomorrow night, basically GFS model run, which is a little bit east of the NHC track. And you can see how those strong tropical storm and hurricane force winds are just pushing that water all along central Appalachia Bay, eastern Appalachia Bay, the Nature Coast, and down into Tampa Bay. So you can see why that's a dangerous situation. We'll hope for the best, in these areas, but this wall of water is coming, and it really doesn't matter if Helene doesn't get up to be a 4, stays a 3, or even if it was to be a Category 2 hurricane. Category does not describe the severity of the surge impacts in this case. You need to take this storm seriously, no matter what category it is tomorrow. And it's not too late to leave tomorrow morning if you're in those flooding areas. So anyway, just that's the last look at the storm surge because 15 to 20 feet. They're writing it extra bold, extra large on this map for a reason, and it's to try to save your life. Talking about the wind threat, no less of a widespread, potentially catastrophic wind situation developing across North Florida um, than the surge. First, I do want to point out in this kind of broader perspective that we have here on winds, these areas that are highlighted in yellow are areas where wind gusts are probably going to top out at 40 to 55 miles per hour. And that's the entire state of Florida, including South Florida, Central Florida, Northeast Florida, even potentially here in the Western Panhandle, which otherwise is coming out on top. Those dangerous, those winds can knock down trees. They can knock down some power lines if you're unlucky. And with the speed that this thing is going to be coming in, 20 miles an hour or more, heading into Georgia, we're also going to see that broad area of tropical storm force winds in gusts extending all the way across Georgia into the Carolinas, Tennessee, eastern Alabama. So broad wind impacts expected over the next 36, 48 hours. But really, the area that's of most concern here is this area that's highlighted in red. And I'll zoom in here to show you exactly where I'm talking about. This corresponds, roughly to the hurricane warning area, and I'm talking about the Eastern Panhandle, the Big Bend, and Southwest Georgia. These areas outlined in red, those are the areas where hurricane force winds, at least in gusts, are possible. Not everywhere in this area is going to see hurricane force wind gusts, but it certainly is a possibility. And this area highlighted in purple, this area is at the greatest risk of seeing potential winds, at least in gusts, inland, of 110 miles per hour or greater. So that's kind of your structural damage threshold. That's where you'll start seeing um, manufactured homes or mobile homes seeing severe structural damage, some shingles coming off, maybe some siding coming off of well-built permanent structures. So that area in purple, yeah, I showed you it yesterday, and it's basically in the same place that it was yesterday. We haven't really moved that threat area. Not only does it include the potential for Category 3, Category 4 level wind gusts all along the Appalachie Bay coast, that 110 mile per hour or greater wind gust threat extends inland to Tallahassee, to Thomasville. It's something that is a broad area because this storm is going to be coming in so quickly. This is the official National Weather Service wind gust forecast map. And you can see here that this core of the storm, they have it moving, basically straight up central Appalachie Bay. That core of the storm coming right over Tallahassee, and the NWS seeing the potential for 110 mile per hour wind gusts in Tallahassee if that core does in fact move over us. I should zoom in on the southeast here. This is a broader perspective on that wind gust, and you can see because this storm is going to be rocketing inland so quickly, it has the potential to do 50, 60, 70, even 80 mile per hour wind gusts across a lot of west central Georgia, and even be doing wind damage in the Atlanta area on Friday. So that core rocketing inland, it's something to watch out for. If you're in the way of that core, there's a huge difference in impacts of getting bands and gusts in the bands versus getting the core of a hurricane. It's a very different experience. Now, because of this risk, these areas highlighted in red, those are your hurricane warning areas tonight. Everybody else from the Florida Keys up through South Carolina, Western North Carolina, Georgia, Western Alabama, under a tropical storm warning, except for you out here in Pensacola and Destin. So congratulations to you guys. But very broad area of warnings reflecting the gigantic wind radii with, you can see this area highlighted in yellow. There's your outline of sustained tropical storm force wind radii extending out from the storm. So as that moves north, you can see why those warnings exist. It's because it's going to cover most of the state of Florida. So I do want to show one model tonight, and the reason I'm showing this one, it's the American model that's designed specifically to model the inner hurricane core process. It's called the HAFS A. There's a HAFS A and a HAFS B. It's run every 6 hours. The reason I'm showing HAFS A tonight is because this is the model's kind of snapshot of what the storm's wind field was supposed to look like at 8 o'clock tonight. The minimum pressure of 972 millibars. And it's really, of the hurricane models, the one that's doing the best job of capturing how strong the storm is now and what it looks like. That's a very key component of an accurate forecast going forward. So as we roll forward in these 3-hour time steps, we see some intensification into the overnight hours. These purples are hurricane force winds developing. And then when we get into the morning hours tomorrow, that's when we really start to intensify. We're dropping down into the 940s for pressure. And then by the time 8 o'clock tomorrow night rolls around, you've got this area, this kind of donut of these hurricane force winds outlined here in purple that's moving north through Appalachia Bay. And then we're going to move that inland as we go forward. And that's what moves into the Big Bend and the Eastern Panhandle. So believe it or not, this is actually one of the less aggressive models in intensifying Helene, and it is the one that has, I think, the most realistic snapshot. So, that core, you can see it here at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. This hurricane model's opinion is that core is going to be, somewhere on the order of 80 miles wide, something like that, and it's going to be moving inland. So, if you're in Tallahassee, there's some degrees of freedom left in the forecast here. We don't know exactly how wide the core is going to be. We don't know exactly what the track is going to be, whether it's going to be into western or eastern Appalachia Bay. But we're really running out of degrees of freedom where we don't get some piece of this inner core, kind of the eye wall of Hurricane Helene tomorrow night. Maybe it's the northwestern quad, maybe it's the northeastern quad. That's just, I don't know yet. But what I am telling you is that if you get the eye wall of a hurricane, is just a tremendously different experience than going through something like, the part of Hurricane Michael that got into Tallahassee in 2018. That wasn't the eye wall. The eye wall of Michael came through Panama City Beach and then up through Mariana. This is a situation where, in this case, or the Eastern Panhandle, Big Bend region will be getting the core of the system. Is it possible that the storm slides southeast enough that the core just barely clips or misses Tallahassee? Yeah, it is possible, but I wouldn't bank on it. I don't think we're going to have that 11th hour escape this time. This is a large storm. This is tracking very consistently with these model runs that bring this core straight up into the Big Bend region and the Eastern Panhandle. So, prepare your property as best you can. If you want to evacuate in Tallahassee, if you have trees over your house, you don't want to be here. Power outages are going to be long. If this is to happen, a week or more, certainly. If you want to evacuate, it's not too late. There's just intermittent rain out there right now. I would recommend going west. I would go west until you're out of the tropical storm warning area here in the Western Panhandle. You really don't need to go farther than that to get away from the wind threat. Okay, and the final threat that I want to talk about tonight is rainfall. It's a formidable threat as well. Here's the radar. It's already lighting up across Florida and the southeast. We've got several bands coming through South Florida right now. We've got this kind of convergence band where the storm circulation is butting up against kind of an advancing mid-latitude weather system here, and it's resulting in heavy rainfall across the central and eastern panhandle tonight. That heavy rain is going to, that area of heavy rainfall is going to continue to expand north. We'll be seeing steadier, heavier rain in South Florida by morning and in North Florida by the early afternoon hours. In total, all that rainfall that we're going to see on Thursday and then tailing off as we go into Friday, it's going to be quite heavy, associated with that core of the storm. And we're talking about certainly 4 to 8 inch totals across most of the western half of Georgia, eastern Alabama, big chunk of the Panhandle and Big Bend region, with some embedded rainfall totals probably of 8 to 10 inches or more as well. And because of that, and because of the fact that we're really dropping a lot of that rainfall on saturated soil, there's a very high risk of flash flooding over the next few days. And that's not only in the Tallahassee region, this high-risk region highlighted in pink. It's also up here in North Georgia and western North Carolina, where those upsloping winds going up the mountains will wring out the moisture, and the rainfall will just keep coming there. This area highlighted in red also has moderate risks of flash flooding over the next 3 days. So because of that, flood watches are up for large portions of the southeastern United States. The areas in green are under a flood watch. The areas in red are already under flash flood warnings. There's a pretty extensive area already here of the central panhandle across Gadsden County, south towards Apalachicola, that are under those flash flood warnings, in southwest Georgia, and then up here in the Appalachian Mountains. These flood watches extend all the way to West Virginia, kind of indirectly in association with Helene. And just walking through that HAFS A model in 3-hour time steps, because it's the one that seems to have the best idea what's going on right now. These are the rainfall fields as we go forward every 3 hours. We don't really see Florida yet, but there it is coming into view as of the early afternoon, the later afternoon, the evening hours, and then landfall, the heaviest precipitation coming in with that eye wall right around the 9 o'clock to midnight hour tomorrow night. So just to wrap it up, I just want to emphasize again here, we've had a lot of hurricanes in North Florida in the past 10 years. You know it, I know it, we are tired of this. But we have never had a threat quite like this one, specifically in the capital region. These are all the Category 2 or higher storms that have ever moved across Leon County in the past 170 years. There's only 2 Category 2s, one in 1852, one in 1886, and we've expanded our perspective out more broadly. These are all the major hurricanes, Category 3s, 4s, and 5s that have moved within, say, 60 miles of Wakulla County. And there's only 5 of them historically: 1851, 1877, 1894, Michael, which of course cut through Panama City and then up through Mariana, went to the west, and then Adelia off in eastern Appalachia Bay in 2023. Adelia was also quite a small storm, so it's not a great comparison here to Helene, which is going to be very, very large. So there's just no living memory of this degree of surge, of the core of a major hurricane moving across the eastern panhandle or the Big Bend, and the wind risk associated with that. I've only been in the core of a hurricane once in my life, with Hurricane Charlie in Seminole County, and it was already well inland at that point, but it was far, far beyond the kind of banding wind and rainfall that I'd experienced and have experienced since in other hurricanes. So we just need to take this very, very seriously and know that it's not something that we've really seen here since the 1840s in North Florida. Apparently 1841 through 1844 had quite a run of storms that maybe is the only thing that can rival the past 6 years here in North Florida. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up tonight. I will try to take a few questions. Let's see if there's any good questions. Where's the best direction to evacuate? If you are in North Florida, you want to evacuate to the west. Safest conditions, closest area to get to safety is by going west towards the western panhandle or the Mobile area. Although at this point, you also have to be very aware that if you're in Tallahassee, there are flash flood warnings in effect to your west. So certainly travel with caution if you're doing so. In northern Tallahassee, what types of wind could we expect? Well, that depends on if you get the northwestern part of the eye wall, the northeastern part of the eye wall. Does Helene go just to our west, just to our east? I think that at this point, we're certainly going to see impacts exceeding what we saw in Tallahassee from Michael, which was 70, 75 mile an hour wind gusts. We're talking at least 80 to 100 mile an hour wind gusts in Tallahassee, with a very good chance that we're going to be somewhere in that 100 to 120 range. Further, closer to the coast you go, probably the better chance of seeing those 100 plus numbers it'll be. All right. How quickly will the Category 3, 4 level drop down once Helene makes landfall? Not quickly enough, because it's going to be going inland so fast, 20, 25 miles an hour. That's why it's going to be carrying those 100 plus mile per hour wind gusts so far inland. It will drop likely below Category 3 intensity within several hours, 3 to 4 hours. But in that time, it's also going to be marching 80 miles inland. So it's going to feel like a long way. All right. Well, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I will be back tomorrow with a live blog that's going to start in the late morning hours. I'll lay out the situation tomorrow morning, and then I will be continuously keeping you apprised of the situation through the day, through landfall here in North Florida, um, until uh, until the threat is over. All right. Well, Florida, this is one heck of a mess that we're in. Yet again, we're going to need good luck and good decision making to get through it safely. If you have a friend who's being recalcitrant about getting out of an evacuation area, please try to talk some sense into them tonight. It's not too late to get to higher ground. You may be saving your family or friend's life tonight by doing so. All right. Take care, Florida. I'll be back tomorrow, and good night.